In 2021, the Toronto Transit Company is going to be implementing a really neat pilot project. An automated shuttle called Ollie 2.0 that can hold up to 8 people is going to be collecting people in the West Rouge neighborhood of Toronto and then taking them to the Rouge GO station. So basically, this solves the last mile problem of how you get people from their neighborhood to the mass transit without using cars or anything else. It's very efficient. Now, to talk about that, I'm going to be chatting with Josipa Petrunic, who is the CEO of CUTRIC. And welcome to the interview, Josipa.
Thanks for inviting me back.
Now, you and I have talked about this before. About 6 months ago, we did an interview, and you described this very thing, this trend that was going to happen. And it looks like we are well on our way to making this model work with the new automated shuttle technology.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, and in fact, it is not new. It's been building on the last couple years of deployment and pilot projects across Canada. So the Toronto project is one of the last pilot projects to get out the door that the federal government started funding back in 2018. There's about a half a dozen of them. In a lot of them, Pacific Western is operating the vehicles. They did the one out in Calgary, among other cities. And the idea across all of these pilots has been roughly the same, which is, let's see how these shuttles operate. Do they stop too frequently? Because, of course, they're using cameras to read their surroundings. And so, you know, if a bird flies in front of them, do they stop and therefore are ineffectual? That was pretty much the goal across all the pilots. And it is still the goal in Toronto, is to see how these shuttles work. Do they stop too frequently? Are they generally safe? So insofar as that is occurring, this project is sort of the period at the end of a sentence, a very long sentence, for the last 2 years of piloting in Canada.
Well, if there have been other pilots, and it's interesting we talk about new as in a couple of years ago, but in terms of these other pilots, has the experience been fairly positive?
It's been a mixed bag. I think you could take one general outcome and say, no, the experience hasn't been good. And the general outcome is nobody's bought these things. So there's been pilot after pilot from Calgary to Surrey to Trois-Rivières to now Toronto, and no city, no transit agency has actually bought these shuttles. So that's not a great indicator, because one would imagine that you're deploying these things to see about first kilometer, last kilometer, overcoming the gap. If they really were great technology, well, then the transit agency would probably go buy a bunch of these. But I would say take that with a grain of salt. I mean, there's a reason we do demonstration projects. It's to figure out the whole plethora of things that could go wrong. Do some things go right? And insofar as some things went right, there are successes from Calgary to Surrey to Trois-Rivières and onward. Riders like the technology. So that's consistently coming out. People on these shuttles are kind of wowed and they really like them and they're smooth and they're quiet. So that's a plus, because you want clients in transit liking their ride. The ongoing challenge that has stopped procurements from happening is the fact that these vehicles, whether it's an Ollie or an Easy Mile or an Avia shuttle, they don't talk to each other. So they're not standardized technology yet. And so if Calgary bought certain kinds of vehicles in Toronto, they couldn't mix and match them. And that means for Toronto, if they buy a certain kind of shuttle, they can't buy different ones to work with it. And that's causing the challenge.
Now, your organization, CUTRIC, it kind of works in this area, right? So are you folks working with regulators, companies, municipalities, and so on to figure out that standardization issue?
Yeah, all of the above. So in terms of herding cats, it is definitely a massive herd. Like there's an ancestry.com massive network somewhere out there to indicate this kind of lineage. So we are working with the cities, first of all. There are a lot of cities, I would say about 12 cities in Canada right now, that really want to be able to deploy these things. And some of them are regions like York Region or Brampton, you know, and Surrey still and Vancouver. They really want to deploy these things. So that's a plus. The problem is they don't know what to buy. And so what we're working with is, in tandem with their desire, we've got a number of manufacturers of these shuttles and operators of the digital systems together around a table. And it's taken a couple years, but what we're coming to now is a list of those technical specifications that you could buy and put into a procurement document and know that as a city, you're going to get a vehicle that will talk to other vehicles. That's coming up in the next few months, and it's been a long haul, but we're getting there.
Last question, Josipa. This kind of illustrates something I notice in a lot of technology stories that I do, which is that the development of the technology itself is only a very small part of the adoption process. And I think this, having to develop standardized, protocols, whatever they are, get everybody together in a room, takes a year or two to talk it all through, is not that uncommon.
No, that's right. And there's a language for this. And in the science industry, certainly in aerospace, people talk about the TRL, the technology readiness level. It's a bit of jargon, but basically what it means is like NASA developed this scale years ago. It's on the scale of 1 to 9. And it says if your technology is like between 1 to 3, it's in the university lab. Like it's an idea in your mind. There's no commercial pathway. It's not at Walmart. You can't buy this thing. You're just trying to figure out what the electron does, right? Or the atom does. If your technology is between 4 to 6, you've probably built a prototype, a little pilot, maybe a beta version. It's not ready for the market, but like there's a thing, it exists and you can kind of test it, but it's a lot of steps away from market ready. And then if you're in zone 7 to 9, you're getting to market ready. And by the time you're at zone 9, it's in Walmart, it's off the shelf, you can buy it, right? So if you look at these kinds of technologies, smart shuttles, in and of themselves, like one shuttle by one manufacturer is now at the stage of TRL 6-7. You can pilot it and you can demonstrate that it works on its own. But when you try to package it with city streets, city design, traffic lights, other vehicles, and then other shuttles, and an operational control room at transit that has never had to deal with these moving robots, it's down around that TRL 4, right? So the shuttles themselves might be getting into TRL 7, 8, 9. If you just buy that shuttle, that operator, that proprietary system, you want to mix and match, you're down at that TRL 4, 5. So you're quite right. It's not just the technology, it's the whole system, the urban design, the who's operating it, who's in power and control, who's funding it, what will the streets look like, all that stuff has to work together and it doesn't happen overnight.
That's a very interesting insight, Josipa. Thank you very much for that. And we will be talking to you again in for future interviews. This is electrified urban transit is a huge trend right now, and you folks do great work.
Thanks so much, Markham. I look forward to the next dialogue.